We are meeting by Zoom. It's 5:30. This is the Finance and Operations Committee. Miss Johnson?
Present.
Mrs. Oden is present. Mr. Garino might be a little late or might not get here due to some work commitments. And also here is Miss Raymond, President of the Board. Mr. Donovan, our Finance and Operations COO, and Shawn Smith, who gets everything done in the district. And Tara Kinseller, who is the host for the meeting. Okay, first on the agenda is the year-end plant operation purchases. And I would guess that's you, Shawn.
Yes, it is. Thank you, and good evening. You may recall, well, some of you may recall years and years ago, we had another crisis. It wasn't anything as severe as the current one, but we again put in requests through FEMA for reimbursement. The city did as a whole, and I never saw a cent of that. I'm not complaining. It's just, it went to the city coffers, and I'm sure it was put to good use. So when I volunteered this year to the mayor that we could fund at least the beginning of the alternate care facility at the South High School, he said okay. And so it cost us about $80,000, primarily through our electrical supply line. I wasn't holding my breath to see the money back, but poof, it suddenly showed up in the middle of June. And which is typically we're done spending at that point, or we're just we're just doing maintenance spending just to keep on fixing things. So we had to scramble to decide how to best spend that. A good amount of it went to open purchase orders, which is as long as we were invoiced for the things we purchased, like plumbing supplies, then we were okay, and it was within last fiscal year. A couple large ticket items that were above our threshold, Dan's and mine, that is, that require board approval. So Dan and I talked about it, and given that everything going on, we felt that we should proceed with it and hopefully get your blessing after the fact. So there were 3 of those projects. One purchase order went to Eckhart & Johnson, who was a HVAC firm, and this was to replace the air handling unit that serves the media center at New Searles Elementary. This has been on our list for quite some time of things to do under our major repairs, which you may recall seeing it in the budget preparation for this year and last year. So it's kind of a placeholder. We did receive a couple of quotes, a couple options from them. We're still evaluating them. And but this at least puts the money out there for that use, and we don't lose it at year end. There were 2 other purchase orders to Allied Technology. They are the firm that takes care of all our security and access control equipment. Again, you may recall that we had some vandalism right at the very onset of the Black Lives Matter issue. And we were tagged to the North High School on the backside of the school. Our cameras couldn't pick up a thing as far as who might have done that. So part of what this does is upgrade our exterior cameras to more high definition, also the cameras that can actually see at nighttime. And there's some blind spots also in the schools that we were augmenting our systems in both North and South High School. The third item was to purchase a new lawn tractor. We referred them as an X-Mark tractor. This was also in our annual plan, and it was just, it was $11,839, so it was slightly above where we had to come to you for approval. So I just request that you approve all those, and I think we got good value for our money with all 3 of those.
Okay. Well, thank you for all of that. I have a question on the security cameras. You mentioned that it didn't pick up the vandalism that happened in the back of the school. at night. Would the other cameras in the front pick up things at night?
No, they wouldn't, unless the parking lot lights were on.
Oh, okay.
That's the issue. I mean, if the lights are on, they see great. If they're off, they don't. These are more of an infrared technology, kind of a military technology, as you're probably somewhat familiar with, where military guys and gals can see at nighttime, like night vision goggles, so to speak. So these improve our ability to catch things like that in the future.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay. Ms. Raymond?
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you could see me or not, and I couldn't unmute. I'm just curious if we fronted some of the money for the renovations to South. Is that what it sounds like? Did that come out of your budget, Mr. Smith, and the deferred maintenance budget? Do we need to make you whole again? Like, how does that work?
Are you asking me about the actual damage that was done when they tagged the school, or?
No, I meant, I thought that you had said that we spent money helping to retrofit South for the expanded medical use. And I'm wondering where that money came from. Did it come from your funds, and do we need to make you whole at some point?
No, it came out of, well, yes, it came out of my funds originally. And the vast majority of what I had to purchase for the care facility was electrical.
Okay.
And this amount that I talk about in the memo that came back from the city, the 80,000, reimburses me for that work.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we don't end up in a hole, especially in deferred maintenance, which always never has enough.
I would agree with that, but yeah. Yes, I would say we're whole at this point.
Okay.
Yes, this is sort of highly irregular because, as Shawn said, we do get FEMA funds, but FEMA typically takes a year or so before they give you any funding. So if you spend some of your operating budget money, if it comes back, it doesn't come back till a year or so later. This year, because of all the various federal funding, the city was able to get some of that money back, so they gave it to us right in the middle of June. So Shawn and I spoke, and I said, well, we don't have time to reach out to the board on all these items to get approval. If we don't spend it, he wouldn't be made whole. So this was a way we said, okay, let's spend that 80 grand, which he did. This is about, what, 30, 40, 50, about 70,000 of it or so. So we just did it, but I said, since it's board approved items, we should reach out to the board and tell them what we did with it. Typically, we won't spend it until the board approves it, but we just didn't have time, or then we would have been in that conundrum where we would have turned around and given it right back to the city.
Right. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I did not want to give it back to the city and have Shawn not be able to have what he needed in the future.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to need a motion for that, or do we wait until the board meeting for the motion?
I think you should probably have a motion now to approve the purchase orders listed on the memo dated July 1st from Shawn Smith.
Okay. I'm looking for a motion to approve the purchase orders from Shawn Smith dated July 1st? Did you say?
So moved.
July 1st? Okay. Second by Ms. Johnson. Roll call. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Oden is yes. Okay, motion passes unanimously. And thank you, Shawn, and Mr. Donovan for doing all that. Okay. Now, are you leaving, Mr. Smith?
I am, but I'd just like to inform you one thing, if that's okay. I'll be
Okay.
brief. I briefed the Joint Special School Building Committee last night, but school building aid. We had to put in submittals to the state for school building aid for the middle school project for all three schools, Pennachuck Middle, Fairgrounds Middle, and the new middle school. And according to the background information we had, is Nashua could stand or could be in position to get up to 40% back from the state for the construction piece of the project, which means you're familiar with the term soft costs. So the architect fees, furnishings, that sort of thing would not be reimbursed, but the actual hard construction that Harvey Construction is putting in would potentially be reimbursed. So I think that just puts us in a good place to hopefully get some money back for the city, and that'll reduce the bond burden on everybody.
Wow. 40% also of the new construction on the new middle school?
Yeah, so that'd be 40% of any construction piece for those three schools. And very roughly, construction costs for the project are called $100 million. So it's a little bit less. But then, of course, 40% is $40 million. So it's a good chunk of change we could potentially get, I think, depending on the state legislature and how they decide to fund it.
Oh, that's encouraging. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay. Well, thank you for the good news, Mr. Smith. We often don't get good news like that. We have lots of good news tonight. Thank you.
Be better
So
news
I
when they
would-
give us the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would caution on the good news. Shawn did a wonderful job getting it together. I asked him for help. I didn't read the whole application, and there was a significant number of attachments at the end of the application, so we had to really scurry at the end to get them all done. So that was the good news, that it did get done and met the deadline. The thing is, with the state going through the issue it's going through now, this isn't necessarily funded yet. This was a program that 10 years ago we made great use of. Actually, 20 so years ago, we used it for the high school. We used it for a number of other projects. But since the last project we received any funds for was when we did the renovation to Charlotte and Fairgrounds Elementary School, the HVAC. So now we've done significant projects like Broad Street and Sunset and haven't received any money because the fund it was no longer funded by the state. So now they're putting the process back in place, but the question is, are they going to have any funding behind the process? So we shall see. But if they do, at least we're in the queue.
Mm-hmm. And at least there's a possibility if they're talking about it. So
Exactly.
you know, I think we could be in good shape. We'll have to wait and see, but that's better news than the status quo. So thank you so much, Mr. Smith. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
And good evening to everybody else.
Okay, thank you.
Good night, Shawn.
Right.
Right. Okay, and the next issue on the agenda is the bus contract.
Okay, the bus contract, they did not get back to me with the second set of changes. They had hoped to. So we're going to have to move that until the next meeting, which I think will be fine if we do it at the next meeting in August. Just to update you, they sent the contract. I reviewed it. And they made probably 80% of the changes, what we requested. There were a couple of others that were not changed, to sort of my satisfaction, so to speak. So I sent them back. That was last week, midweek. As it turned out, the area vice president was on vacation last week, so he didn't get to it till Monday. He had hoped to be able to get it back to me for tonight, but he did not. So we'll move that to the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, quick question. I know we didn't sign the excuse me, the contract yet. But do we have any type of clauses in there in case school doesn't open and we're doing everything still remote?
That's one of the clauses that was sent back. So
Okay,
the discussion has taken place. We don't have sort of wording that I'm ready to move forward to the board with yet.
okay. I'm hoping that we're gonna resume school and get these kids back where they belong, but we just gotta cover ourselves and everybody completely. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Next issue is the copier lease.
Okay, I'm going to speak. I don't have a copy of that in front of me, but I know enough about it, so
I can share the screen if you'd like to. Dan.
that'd be wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Tara. Very good. Okay, so just to give everyone a bit of a background, back about 6 years ago, we had 3 different vendors for copy machines. We had many old, broken down machines. We had not put any money into copy machines in our schools for a number of years. So it got to the point where all hell was breaking loose, so to speak. And so we went out and we did some discussions and some bids, and we ended up sort of signing an agreement with this company called SPC. Now, basically, what SPC does is they bring together school districts, a number of them, and then they bid everyone together. So, for example, if 5 different school districts needed 10 machines each, they could go out and get pricing for 10 machines, but the volume really isn't there. Whereas if they had 10 districts that needed 10 machines, SPC combines them and bids out for 100 machines. That way they can get much lower prices. And basically the way the copier game works when you're bidding out in large sums is you get the cost of the copier. The cost of the copier is very low compared to the retail price. It's not much more than what their cost is. But what they do is they turn around and for every copy you make, you get charged a certain amount of money. So for example, a black and white copy on the current contract is 1/3 of 1 cent. For a color copy, it's closer to a penny, a little over a penny actually. So that's where the districts make their money. They get their machines in many different school districts, or in a city like Nashua, many different schools because we have so many schools. But it's worked out pretty well for us. We're coming to the end of the current contract, and what I'd like to do, what the plan here is to, the last time we did a deal with them, we didn't have enough of a down payment so that we could keep the cost at about $100,000 a year. So I said to the owner of SPC, I said, Skip, I can only afford in my operating budget about $100,000 a year for the copiers themselves. I can't afford to pay much more than that. So the group of copiers that we are working with now, a number of them are used copiers. Not heavily used, but they were used copiers when they were brought in. Obviously, as time went on, we had much more of a problem with the used ones than we did with the new ones. And the other thing that happened was some schools got new ones, some schools got used ones. I caught a lot of flack for that, and probably deservedly so in a sense. But what this new plan is doing is we're going to get 146 brand new copiers this coming school year. And then in 2023, 76 more new ones. So in 2023, the summer of 2023, we will have either all brand new or less than 3-year-old copy machines. That will lead to a lot fewer breakdowns. That will lead to a lot happier secretaries, principals, parents that come in and copy things. And by using some of the monies, which I'll talk about in a second, a down payment, we're going to be able to keep this for the next 5 to 6 years at $100,000 a year. So this is one of the things that I was talking about, using the one-time funds in a way that you sort of pay a down payment and then you keep your cost at this $100,000 level. And then we'll get all new machines. So SPC went out and got bids. Currently, we use Konica Minolta. Konica Minolta had the best bid. So we feel like that's the company we'd like to keep them. Their service has been excellent. Keep in mind that a great copy machine's kind of like a car. You can buy that fancy BMW like Tara does, but if you don't have somebody to fix it, then it doesn't come in too handy. Okay, so same with a copy machine. So Konica Minoltas are good. The Canons are very good, but the service that we got with the Konica Minolta people has been way better than with the Canons that we had in the first contract. So what this contract will be is, like I said, 146 new ones, 76 in 2023. We're going to pay a down payment over time the down payment we're going to pay over the next few months is $338,000. And then going forward, it'll be $100,000 a year for all those new machines, and also for some printers, 141 new printers also. Some of the printers we have in the district are owned by teachers or people like that. We don't supply anything with them. We simply hook them up for them. We tell the teacher, you have to deal with the cartridges, etc. But we also have some more high-speed printers. A number of those are 8 to 10 years old. There are a lot of the old HP printers. So we'll be replacing those also. So basically the $338,000, where that down payment is coming from, $50,000 from excess funds in this year's operating budget. And when we get to the transfers, you'll see that transfer. $38,000 from the savings on this year's copier, the cost per copy contract. We were out of school for 3 months, basically, so we saved $38,000 on the cost per copy. So I said, we'll roll that over. And then the other 250 is the one-time funds, that 2.2 million that's in the budget for this current school year now that just started in July. So that's where we were able to come up with the funds to get the 338, which gets us very close to $100,000 a year for the next 5 or 6 years. That's the plan. That's what we'd like to do. As you can see, if you look under the service and supplies section, it's colored in yellow. The cost is 0.00397 for black and 0.070058 for color. So that's the cost per copy. So the down payment and the $100,000 a year is that, which will be a lease, that is to pay for the copiers themselves. And then for each copy you do, you pay those amounts. Those amounts have been running in a full year for us about $160,000. So hopefully at some point people talk about becoming paperless. Schools are very far away from doing that. I hope at some point that maybe people will start to move in that direction. But at this point, I think this is a good use of the one-time funds so that we keep for the next 5 or 6 years. We'll be in very good shape with new copies, and we'll have very good service, and we'll have very low pricing on the cost per copy.
Oh, that sounds really appealing, to be able to save money going forward. Can I ask, does this include the ink?
The ink is part of the copy, yes.
Okay, wow.
Yep.
okay.
So it includes the maintenance and the ink and everything it takes for a copier to produce a print.
Okay, well, thank you. Anybody have any questions? I can't see all of the screen, but I don't hear anybody, so,
I'm sorry, Dottie, I
Oh.
have a quick question.
okay,
Sorry.
go ahead.
When will the one-time funds be dispersed, or have they been already?
What was that again? I'm sorry.
I was wondering when those one-time funds would be dispersed.
I believe the way the budget was put together was it was put in contingency. So the city, I believe, has the money. The funds were put in contingency. So if that's the case, which I think it is, I'll double check. We need to reach out to the Board of Aldermen and say, we would like you to release the contingency on this. Now, I'm hoping we can put something in place so every single time we go to spend some of that, we don't have to do a separate resolution. But I believe that's what they did. I can verify that and have an answer at the full board meeting.
No, that sounds what I thought. But I wasn't sure if they needed, like, if we could give them a list of all the planned purchases and they could just disperse it all, or if we have to do every single time, send a request, have them vote on it, and then that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. So I hope that's not the case. I think if they have a list of, I know there was some strong concern from some of the aldermen that we use some of that 2.2 million for the deferred maintenance for Shawn. And I think that's what the plan is. Hopefully the board agrees with me. But if that's in fact the case, I don't think we'll get a lot of kickback from the board on how we're going to spend that money, as long as we include some of the deferred maintenance.
Right. No, I mean, I have no objection to that, because the deferred maintenance needs it. But we may also find that we have needs as a result of whatever plan we have going forward for the school in the fall. So, like, I don't want to commit one way or the other. Do you require a specially worded motion at the full board?
For this,
Yeah, like, would the motion be to, I don't know, that's what I'm wondering.
yeah, I think for the lease, and they didn't send it to me, there was a board motion that the lease was going to require. But I guess if tonight, if you decide to approve it, you could approve the proposed contract with SPC. And then at the full board, I could get the language. I'll tell them I need the language. Is the meeting next week?
Next Wednesday,
Okay.
for
Yeah.
us. I don't know what it is for the aldermen.
Yeah, well, I think we just, at this point, we get this approved at this level. And then getting the 250, I told them they might have to wait a little bit for that piece of it. So I guess tonight's motion would be to approve the proposed contract with SPC for the purchase of 223 new copiers and printers.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
I'm sorry, 223, the purchase of 223 copiers and something else?
Printers.
Printers, thank you. Okay, so I move to approve the proposed contract with SPC for the purchase of 223 copiers and printers. Looking for a second?
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by Ms. Johnson. We'll put that to a vote. Ms. Johnson
Yes.
and Mrs. Oden is a yes, passed unanimously. Thank you. And we will get that information for the board meeting.
Yes.
Okay, the next issue is the Student Activity Fund.
Okay. So each year, the board essentially requests, I believe it's a policy, that all the student activity funds are reviewed by an audit firm. We've been using the company Plodzik and Sanderson, a New Hampshire firm, for a long time. Many school districts deal with them when it comes to this. They're sort of the experts in this area. So the interesting thing is this is an audit, not for this past school year, but for the previous school year. So a lot of the recommendations may end up showing up again next year because we're basically a year behind at this point. We've had this audit since I've been here with the same firm. This audit, to be honest with you, has a little bit more, a few more issues brought up than we typically would have. I would say in the past, probably 5 years or so, the number of items brought up by the auditors to discuss were fewer. I think part of what that is a change in staff at some of the schools, a change in staff at central office. So I think, though I don't think there's significant issues, and I think the audit report says that there aren't significant issues, but there were items that probably rules that weren't followed. And so we've already reached out, and I'll talk about that later, as a way to try to get back and get a stronger review, a stronger audit next time. So in the general opinion is that our information is prepared fine. It presents fairly in all material respects, assets and liabilities of the Student Activities Fund. So in general, in the big picture, we're okay. But if we slide that down, Tara, please, to where it says approval of employee reimbursements. There you go. We just went by it. Top of sort of page 2, right there. So this is one thing. It hadn't been brought up in the last few audits, but they looked at our procedures, and we have a procedure that says employee reimbursements in excess of $500 should be approved by the superintendent. So there are a number of times in the student activity funds where that happened. I would suggest that we bring this policy to the board and sort of increase that number. I think that number's been there for a long time. I really don't think that every single time there's a $500 reimbursement that we want a superintendent to approve it. That's really going to sort of slow the whole process up. So I think that number should be raised. I'm not 100% sure what value. We can talk about that when we bring it to the policy committee. But I think the auditors did their job. That's what the policy says. They found a number of times where employees were reimbursed $500. Now, you might say, why would an employee be reimbursed $500? We have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student activity funds. So there are many times when the teacher typically who works as sort of the leader of the group, the student group, that person would go out and let's say they were going to have a robot club. They may go out and spend $600 or $700 to buy some of that equipment for the club, and then request reimbursement. What we try to do, student activity funds are raised by students for a specific purpose. So we keep these funds separate. These funds are not commingled with any city funds or school funds. They're in a separate account. And the auditors are very particular about that. This is separate money. It's raised specifically by students for use by students. So, for example, a few years ago, they had raised some money for a disaster, one of the hurricanes down in the Gulf. And then they didn't spend, $400 of it. So we had to go through a long process to say, okay, let's take that $400 and spend it on something else. We had to get special approvals and things like that. So most of the groups that gather significant amounts of money have a teacher that serves as the leader of that group. So, but that's one thing they did note, that there were a number that were of items that weren't approved by the superintendent. The second item here, it says gift card purchases. Typically, what happens here is the schools buy gift cards a lot of times towards the end of the year, and they give them out to students to buy books or to use for some things. They're relatively small amounts of money, but the auditors say, and they've told us this before, we've told the schools this, these 4 schools listed did not basically follow the procedure, that if you are going to give out gift cards, you have to let us know how many you bought, what the value of each one was, and who you gave them to. So they want a lot of detail. These 4 schools did not have all that detail available. They may have at some point in time, but they didn't keep it. They didn't keep it with their records. So that's something that we need to let them know in the future. Any gift cards, if you're going to purchase gift cards, you have to follow through with who you gave them to, how much they were for, how many you bought, etc. The next item where they list is inappropriate disbursements. There are times when, for example, I think one of the items, they took student activity money and they bought an office chair. Those were funds specifically for another purpose. They bought an office chair. There were 3 of these. A couple of them were quite small. To be honest with you, I think part of a couple of them, it was more related to they didn't do a good accounting of the funds. Within the student activity funds, there's typically what they call a principal's account. And a little bit of money goes in there sometimes from various collections. Those amounts can be used by the principal for the school in general. So sometimes they don't put that amount in the correct account. It doesn't go to the principal account. It ends up in one of the other accounts. And I think that's what happened here. So once again, they need to track that better. The next one is insufficient supporting documentation for disbursements. Basically, every time funds are dispersed from a student activity fund, we need to have a receipt. And keep in mind, there's thousands of transactions every year in all these student activity accounts. They found a couple that didn't have receipts. We typically will have 1 or 2 of those every year. So that's not a surprise. That's one that happens all the time. We push and tell them, make sure you have the receipt. And sometimes it doesn't get attached or whatever the reason is. And then the other one, deposit forms not properly completed. All funds should have a duplicate deposit form prepared so that you know two people are basically counting the cash, so to speak. You don't have one person counting the cash. So that once again is a procedural thing that wasn't followed in a couple of cases. And both of those schools had new secretaries managing the process. So somewhat explainable. And then the other thing is stale dated checks. This is more of a bookkeeping thing. The district office accounting group does go out a couple times a year and review the school's accounts. And so we'll be more careful going forward that when checks are sent out and they're not cashed, that at some point we will bring back the money into the account. So these were checks that were out for, I think, over 6 months and not cashed. So that's sort of a bookkeeping area that we need to get better at. So, like I said, this report there's more information here. There's more, let's call it errors, so to speak, than we've had in a while. Typically, we'll have a third of these errors, but I went back and looked, and there were 5 new people in the schools involved with managing these accounts, and there was a new head person at central office. So in a minute, we'll go over another sheet that shows what we've already done to try to prevent this from happening. Okay, and then the next sheet down, Tara. This is a special addendum to the auditor's report. We've never had one of these. This is the first time this has shown up. Not sure if you're aware, but for a few years now, the South, I think it's every other year, has a trip to Hawaii. And it's happened at least twice. I think they were going to do it this year or next year. They probably won't be doing that with what's going on in the world. But there was a trip to Hawaii. Obviously, there were probably 50 to 60 students that would go to Hawaii. It was an extended learning opportunity. It was mixed, not only the fun and the enjoyment of Hawaii, but there are also some learning opportunities. But basically, since it was a very expensive trip, as you would expect, they would collect funds so much per month. And then what was happening was the individual at the school, the teacher that was in charge of this trip, was basically managing all the funds going in and going out. That person was using their personal credit card for some of these things. And the auditor said, for the amount of money flowing through this account, we need to have better controls. So initially, we considered paying the audit firm another $5,000 or $6,000 to go and do another detail audit specifically of this trip. When COVID kicked in, it sort of became impossible because the people weren't around to sit down and speak with. So I basically spoke with the superintendent and said, look, we're not going to be able to do this. We have to get the audit done. Why don't we have them write up a special addendum to the audit? And then once we go back to school, we'll do an internal review of exactly what is happening. Some of their concerns was that an individual that was running the trip would use their own credit card, and then they would receive points that they might be able to use for their own personal thing. There were questions about family members going, and when it came to payment of invoices, it wasn't clearly broken out okay, which funds were paying for students and which funds were paying for family. So those are probably two of the main things, but there were a number of things. And since it was such a significant sum of money, the auditors said you need to get a better handle on this. So we plan on doing that. We'll have to get back to school so we can sit down, pull all the individual records, sit down and speak with the people in charge of running the trip, and put things in place. Personally, I don't think there was any ill will here. Don't honestly know, but I don't think there was. I think if someone was trying to take advantage of things, it's going to be pretty easy to catch them. I really don't think that was the plan. I just think it was sloppy procedures. But until we get into the detail on this, we can't specifically speak to it. So the auditors wanted to write this up individually. Questions so far on that?
I have questions.
Okay, go on, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I kind of reviewed all this and I just about fell over, I think, as I read what the auditor said. Because really some of this is sloppiness. Government, although it's government, it's still a business and things have to be, in my mind, has to be run like a business. I've never heard, and it's always been, that you do not mix personal credit cards with any type of business. I don't care if there's points or not, and you open up a business card and you do what you have to do and you keep the personal separate from the business. To even think that we would have the personal credit card and we put these trips on there, if I'm hearing it correctly. And this is just, you just don't do this. You just don't do this. This is how people get audited with the IRS in business, because things are commingled like this. I'm really surprised at this. I think as I read through, stale checks, I worked at a bank. I think I've done a lot of stuff in my life. Stale checks, anything over 6 months. I mean, we should be really monitoring the checks, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. By the time we get to 4 or 5 months, I guess we should be contacting people about cashing the checks if they're going to cash it. Deposit forms, in multiple schools, the deposit forms are signed by only one secretary. I understand that there's new people in here, but new people have to be trained. And I don't know, when I start a new job, I usually take notes on everything that has to be done. And if I have a question, I call people. Gift cards. We're not even keeping track on who's getting the gift cards, how much. So to me, as a school district, this isn't our first day on the rodeo, and we should have been doing this all along, making sure everything is proper. Because like I said, if a business ran themselves with all these problems, the IRS would have been down their throat fast. So I would like to get, and I don't care if anybody says I'm micromanaging, I'd like to see how we're going to correct this, with what kind of steps we're going to do, so this doesn't happen again, and to make sure that nobody puts anything on their personal credit card, because that really sticks out like a sore thumb. There was, as far as the reimbursements, $500 is low, but yet the superintendent has to approve these things. And if it's not brought to the superintendent, he doesn't approve of it, and we have a problem, and nothing should be going past him. So that's something that sticks out also. So we've got a pretty good list here. It's not bad, but I mean, these are pretty significant, important points that need to be corrected. And again, I'd like to see how this is going to be corrected. So when we have the audit again, we get a good report that we're not going into this, and nobody should ever be using it. And I'm not saying they did it for anything wrong, but the district should have known, don't mix the personal credit card with a business and kids going on a trip. It just does not work. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Raymond, do you have any?
I actually have a question about the personal credit card use and then reimbursement. I'm curious about what the other options are, because I know that the district has a credit card, but if we were to say change a policy saying that purchases can't be made on personal credit cards and then reimbursed as we do now. Or if we just were to say like over a certain amount, you have to use a district credit card. Like, is that feasible? How would that actually work? Would they have to send in a request to Mr. Donovan or Mr. Donovan's office? Like, how does that work?
Yes, well, right now we do have two sort of school district credit cards, one in my name, one in Derek Danielson's name. So if, for example, there was let's say a teacher that needed to take a trip to Texas for some sort of a training session of some sort, and they didn't have their own credit card, they could come to us, make that request. We could pay for it on their behalf. So we do have policies in place regarding use of the credit card. We've shared that with the board every 3 months at Finance and Ops. We show you the types of things we spend it on. We don't use it very frequently, but we do use it occasionally. I think the thing that happened here with the Hawaii trip was it got very large as far as the number of students. And I think the teacher or teachers who decided to run it just said, well, okay, if you're going to buy plane tickets, if you're going to book hotel rooms, you do that all with the credit card. They really should have, for that amount of money, should have reached out and worked with somebody at district office to do it. To be honest with you, I didn't know of this until after it had already happened. I mean, I'm not saying that's an excuse on my behalf. Maybe I should have known about it. But I think we need to get back to the teachers, because they basically, keep in mind, they're collecting money from students and students' parents, and then they're taking that money and they're using it to bring the students on a trip. So that money, like I said, it doesn't even books. We don't even see it. It's just at the student activity fund level. Maybe one thing we can do is say, if there's going to be a significant trip or any significant expense, that they sit down with us and talk about a process and put some controls in place. So at least when the auditors come in to take a look at it, we have some controls and procedures in place. Because, for example, if one of the teachers did put everything on his or her credit card, we probably would have told them that that's not a good look. We don't really want you to do that for a whole number of different reasons. But I think at this point, it's reaching out to this group and saying, okay, this is what we'll fix this specific one. It's in a sense, it's a good thing because we have specifics that we can deal with, and we can put a stricter policy together. And then we gotta get the word out to the secretaries that do the accounting for this, because think about it, every school has their own set of funds, and they have one secretary at each school that cuts the checks, brings in the cash, and it's all done at the school level. It's not done at district office level. If we were to do that, we basically have to add at least another person to do it that way. And then it would be getting the money back and forth between the schools and things like that. I guess it would be an option if we wanted to do it. But as I said before, in the 10 years I've been here, it hasn't been that big an issue. We've had pretty good audits. This is not what I would consider a good audit. So we need to get back and do it. But I think we can do it with the systems we have in place. I guess we'll find out if we can, but I think we can.
Okay, thank you. I personally, I think I'm in favor of setting an amount. You know what I mean? That if you're going to be reimbursed more than, I don't know, thousands of dollars, then you have to run it up the chain first. So, but I don't know. I'll look forward to hearing what you have to say about it as you move forward. Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Donovan. Is this the report I believe we get in a small binder usually?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, it is. And I do have that binder for you. It's just a matter of getting it to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, because that would be helpful for our reference. Thank you.
Yes, it's very good, especially for some of the newer board members, so they can take a look at all the various accounts and details that we're talking about here. And they can get a look at, for example, how much money in these accounts at an elementary school versus a middle school versus the high schools. The high schools have a significant amount of money, and they have hundreds of these funds.
Yeah.
So it's really quite a few things.
Okay, thank you.
Tara, could you slide? Is there one more page underneath this? Yeah. Okay. So what we've already done is sent out to all the people all the secretaries that manage the student activity funds. Here's a list, and it's the same list that we just went through: deposit forms, gift cards, unrelated to student activities, receipts, etc. So we've sent this out. We've told them. We've made them aware. So that was sort of step one. The other step we can do, central office can do, is, like I said, we get out there and review these. We just probably need to do that maybe a little more frequently instead of once a year, 2 or 3 times a year. So hopefully we will. We just hired a new staff person for someone who retired back in March, and we get people trained up and we can get back out there. And because I think part of it is school secretaries are very busy doing lots of different things, but they got to know that, okay, we're there to help you, but we're watching you. You got to follow the procedures. You got to follow the rules. And like I said, some of them are much better at it than others. At an elementary school, you have 2 secretaries. And if one of them isn't sort of business inclined, then it takes a lot of training, a lot of work for them to do this. So that's the first step we've taken. And like I said, we've got more steps to take. I think we got to look at the policy, and when we get back in school and people are around, we really have to sit down with the Hawaii trip people and go through that in much more detail.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. I'm having a few technical problems here. The next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 20 forecast as of June.
Okay. So Tara, if you just stop on the 3rd page there, we'll sort of start with a little more right there. Whoop, the little box. She's having a hard time with this. All right. So if I don't know if you can see my, basically we have at this point in time almost all the costs in for the year. And I'll go through a few things that are still outstanding. But if you recall, last month I projected over $800,000 of excess. The board then voted to spend that amount of money, or close to that amount of money. We then made transfers and took actions to spend that money. At this point in time, I'm projecting that the surplus will be $36,000. And before anyone asks, no, it's too late to spend that money. Okay. But that number could go up a little, could go down a little. What's left now is The big piece that's left, Tara, if you sort of slide to the top of the page on the first one there.
Keep going.
Keep going up. Yeah. Keep going. Oops. Yeah, right there. So you can see in this column, the summer column. So these are the expenses yet to hit the books. The 6,425,000 and the 6,425,000, what that is, and that number will be booked in the next day or two. So that's pretty close to what it's going to be. That's the teachers that get paid in the summer. So they get paid in the summer, but it's for work they did in this school year. So that's bringing back that money. We basically do some accounting entries, and then when it's paid out, we reverse the accounting entries. But that's the 6,425,000. So if you were to run a report now, you'd say, look at all this money they have left. Well, no, there's 6,425,000. The 135,000 are funds. That's the food service people that we that didn't work that we paid. So the food service fund lost a lot of money. Their balance went down to almost zero. So what I'm doing here is taking 135,000 and moving it into the operating budget because we can handle it in the operating budget. And then that gives that money back to the food service account. The food service account has to have some sort of a balance. If it doesn't have a balance, then we're going to have to pay for it in the operating fund anyway. So that's sort of a transfer that we make. And then the 30,000 under here is sometimes we have some people that are paid at they retire right at the very end of the year, and they may have a payout at the end of the year that they get in June, the very end of June. So that's just an estimate. That may come in, it may not come in, but so those over the next week or so, when we run the next payroll, hopefully those amounts will be cleared up. And so the next time I report on this, it'll be almost done. And then you go down further in that column, you see the $20,000. And what that is any tuition reimbursements where people have taken courses and they just haven't given us the reimbursement paperwork yet. So I have about $20,000 there. And then the next line, you'll see 4,000. That's sort of the last Tom Clausen legal bill for the month of June. It's not in here yet, but it will get booked back to June because it was a June expense. And the 5,488, that basically zeroes out that line. That line is sort of OT/PT costs for sped. Typically it zeroes out, so I put it in assuming there'll be a couple of late invoices. They may not come in. If so, that would be an extra 5,000. Then the next few are the electricity, the heating, and the gas. There's always that sort of that June bill that you don't get your bill until July for June, and it will be rolling those costs back. And at the bottom of that grouping, there's a $17,000. There's actually an invoice close to that amount, which is the CAM costs. CAM stands for Common Area Maintenance Costs for the Brentwood building. You get that at the end of the year. So that is an invoice that is due, and that will be charged there. We slide down a little more in the summer. We've got $1,000, and that's for mileage. I know, for example, Lisa Gingras had a few expense reports in June that she just passed in. And then down further, you'll see the 330,000. That is my estimate of what we have left for the out-of-district tuition invoices for the month of June. We'll see exactly how it comes out, but it'll probably be somewhere about that. If you see the number right next to it, you'll see, $7,118,000 of out-of-district tuition. So it's a huge expense. We've talked about that almost every month. And then further down, I think there's not too much more in the summer, no. So you do see a minus 279. What that is we book this at the end of the year. That is the athletic fees that students had paid and the rent that we did receive during the school year for renting our facilities. Those numbers are obviously typically higher than that, but due to the COVID shutdown, it changed. Now, the one other thing I want to show you on this bottom here, if you see this 1,893,000, those are encumbrances. So we still have purchase orders. What that means is there's purchase orders. We've incurred a certain expense. We've requested orders for purchases, supplies, and the invoice is yet to come in as of when I ran this report, which was like a week ago. So that number will go down, but by the end of July, we review all those open purchase orders. And if the equipment doesn't come in time, if they say, sorry, it's a back order, you're not going to get it until December, we reverse the purchase order. So the reason for pointing that out is the $36,000, there's still significant sums of money up there where that number could change either way, back and forth. It's not going to get a whole lot worse, but there could be a few changes. So I think using the $800,000 the way we did for the Smart Start and to make some of those other purchases for ELL and the scanning and some software, I think that was good use of funds. We got things we needed. We're going to end up with a surplus, 36,000. It'll be higher than that is my guess. But like I said, I'll report on that again in August when pretty much everything will be booked. There may be a few encumbrances left, but other than that, everything should be booked and we'll have a real number of what that will be. So that's sort of an update on the forecast. It was an interesting year this year. Next year will be even more interesting, but it was fun.
Anybody have any questions?
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, I have one. There was talk about combining the preschools and having them in one location. Is that supposed to happen for 2020, September?
Possibly. I'm actually negotiating with them now, trying to, I don't say too much about it publicly, but I'm trying to work a different sort of negotiation, but it's possible. We certainly wouldn't use the whole building at this point. But if the decision to go back, have all the students go back full time, for example, if that is made, then there's some schools that are really crying for space. So we'll probably have some use of that building. It may not be immediately in September, but it'll probably be in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
Can just to refresh my recollection, were we purchasing or renting that?
Well,
That's what you're working on.
yes, that's what I'm
Okay.
working. Exactly.
All right, thank you.
Okay. The financial report, since we just went through the forecast, that's effectively the same thing. So if you wanted to, you could look at the financial report, compare it with the forecast. It's going to be, the numbers are going to be pretty much the same thing without that summer column, because these are actual costs incurred to date as of the date of the report. So the numbers might be slightly different. This report might have been printed a few days different, but in total, it'll be about the same. So I think we can move down to the transfers. Okay, now there's a number of transfers in here. Keep in mind, end of the year, so not only are there this is the June transfers. This is where you see the larger sums of money being moved around to cover things. And I'm pretty sure you should be aware of almost all of what these items are. This first one is the CTE program had a book line. They decided, and I can't remember which course it was, but one of the courses they decided to get rid of the books. It might have been one of the drone courses or something like that. There was supposedly some books. They decided not to buy those, and they went out and bought more. It's under ed supplies, but it was either something with drones or something with whatever that program was involved with. So they moved it from books to ed supplies. Mike McQuilkin knows all the details on that one. Next. Okay, this one is the fire department obviously goes through our schools at least once or twice a year, looking for fire hazards, things like that. A lot of times they find the same old stuff. But at both Fairgrounds Elementary and Charlotte, when they went into the computer labs, they felt that the furniture was too large for the rooms that size. They felt it was a fire hazard. If anything were to happen, it would be very difficult to evacuate the students in a safe manner. So they suggested strongly that we see if we could do something about that by purchasing some new furniture. So with some of the extra money that we had, I made the decision to take it from 54100, which is electricity, and we bought new tables and chairs for the computer labs at Fairgrounds Elementary in Charlotte. Shawn Smith and Gary Connors, they're going to be doing the Charlotte one this summer and the Fairgrounds one as soon as they can. I'm not 100% sure if they'll get it done this summer. We'll see. But Charlotte's first on the list because that's where the fire department noticed it first. And then Fairgrounds will follow. So, but we figured we'd use since we had the excess, we'd use the funds to make that purchase. So that should be a good thing for those schools. Okay, the next one here, this is one of the ones, 600,000. Can you slide to see the bottom of it, Tara? I think it's yeah. So this was the first transfer where we took some of the excess money we had in the wages account and we moved it down. That's what the 600,000 is. We took it from wages and put it down to out-of-district tuition. So we had to do two of those. This is the first one. And the second one was taking excess heating fuel costs and moving it down into the 53128 is actually legal. The legal services this year were well over budget. So you'll see another entry or so related to legal. So that's what this entry is for. Okay, this was 55109. That is, yes, telephone. The telephone account was under budget. I think if you recall, when we did the budget this year, we bumped it up a bit. So this was taking excess heating fuel and putting it to telephone to cover the increase in the telephone line versus budget. Okay, and this one was once again taking it from the excess heating fuel and putting it to 55. That telephone also, I don't know why that wasn't done in one entry. It was done in 10 and 5. It should have been done just as a $15,000 entry. It's pretty much the same entry. Okay, this is Ledge. Is that Ledge? I don't think it's Ledge Street. Okay, it is actually Ledge Street. At the end of each year, when we close the kitchens, there's a policy in place that says for the balances that students haven't paid, their unpaid balances with the food service department, the operating budget will pick up that cost. So this is the only entry we actually had to make. The total of that was about $6,000, which is typically what it's been running the last few years. So the other 6,000 we're able to get into the account because there was a little extra money there, but we needed to make an entry here so we could get the rest in. And that was specifically the amount related to Ledge Street. Okay, this was one of the items the board approved when we made the purchase of the ELL books and materials with that 800,000 or so of extra funds. So this was the entry, moving it into the 61875 so that the purchase could be made by the ELL folks, which it was done in June. Okay, this was also approved by the board. We talked about using a lot of the excess funds in this year's operating budget to pay off the Smart Start electrical programs. So this was taking the 366 and the 294 with the excess amounts in the transportation lines, because we effectively agreed to an 80% payment. So there were extra funds in that account. We used that and used it to pay down the Smart Start. And that was, as I said before, approved by the board last month. Okay, this entry was, we have I think it's about $68,000 a year in the budget. It's been the same amount for a long time, where we have music lessons taught by, most of them are not our faculty. There might be one or two, but most of them are outside musicians who work with our students and give lessons, music lessons, instrumental music lessons. Due to COVID, they couldn't continue to do that. They did do a little bit of it on Zoom, but they didn't end up spending the full amount of the $68,000. So the Tom Souza, I believe, who runs the music program, said, could I use that to purchase some musical instruments for some of the middle schools? So I said, fine, you can. Typically, I don't necessarily, if you don't spend all your labor, allow you to do it. But I thought in this case, it was a fair thing to do. So we just simply moved it from labor to the equipment, and they purchased a number of musical instruments. And I think they were mostly larger items, so kids don't have to bring them on the bus and things like that. Okay, this one is, we had some extra money in the educational assistance, and we moved it to legal. Once again, the legal was well over budget this year. Okay, this was one of the items that we board approved last month when we had the excess funds. We decided to take this is for Tara and Gabby, because we don't really give them a lot of money. So every once in a while, you got to be nice to Tara. She gets mad at you, and you don't want that. So the board approved that $8,000. So that's what this entry is doing. Okay, here is the second of the $600,000 that we moved from wages to out-of-district tuition. And this 27,000 is related to the board approved this too. We purchased, was it MyFlex software, I think? And there was another one. There were two softwares and that was part of that 800,000 that we approved. So that's what that was, moving it from the excess labor into the software line in the IT budget. Okay, this is the 50,000 that we talked about earlier on the copier agreement, so that we could get this and keep the number down by using this 50,000 of this year's money and adding it to the one-time money. We're going to be able to keep the cost of the copiers close to the $100,000 number for the next 5 to 6 years. And 6,000 contract services, 5. This was, what was that last item? There was, of the 800,000 the board approved, this was the last item, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head what it was. There was the scanning, and there was one other thing. And I'm pretty sure that's what this was. But I cannot think right now. I'm the brain lock on what this 6,000 was.
QuickBooks? No.
Yes, that's what it is. I think so. No, QuickBooks was on the other one. So I'm not 100. I get it to contract services. You know, I'll have to figure out contract services. Yeah, QuickBooks was part of the software one. I can't remember off the top of my head what this is, but I'll let you all know. I'll send you an email tomorrow on what it was. And is that it, or do we have? I think that's the last
page.
one, right? Yeah. So those are all the transfer entries. As you see, during the year, most of the dollar amounts are a lot less. End of year, you're moving around all the excess funds in the different accounts, and but between the 800 or so approved by the board, and then the transfers for the added district tuition, that was as far as total dollars, that was by far what most of it was for.
Are there any questions? No?
You should probably make a motion to approve that.
Make a motion to approve the transfer report of July 7th, 2020.
So moved.
Okay, we'll take a vote on that. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Oden is yes. Passed unanimously. Thank you. Well, it looks like that's it for tonight. Mr. Donovan, you don't have anything else, do you?
Nope, not right now.
Okay. Ms. Johnson, you have anything?
I think I'm good.
Okay. Ms. Raymond? You good?
I'm great, thank you.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Oden is yes. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, Mr. Donovan.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye now.